his best friend being devoured by two apex predators. He tried to reach Damien to save him, but the sharks were too fast, too furious, too ferocious. Justin's hands trembled, his entire body shaking with grief and helplessness. He could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he watched the gruesome spectacle unfold before him, unable to do anything to stop it. Minutes that felt like hours passed before the sharks finally retreated, leaving behind a trail of crimson in the water. Damien's lifeless body floated, disfigured and torn, a harrowing sight that Justin could never erase from his memory. The ocean that had once been a source of wonder and awe had turned into a nightmarish scene of carnage. In the shock and panic, Justin swam towards the shore with all his strength, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. The image of Damien being ripped apart by the two sharks replayed in his mind like a horror movie on a loop, each detail etched into his soul with searing pain. He reached the shore, stumbling onto the sand, his body and mind in a state of turmoil. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Justin was emotionally scarred for life. He suffered from vivid nightmares, reliving the gruesome scene of Damien's death every night. The local news was flooded with a story of how two sharks ripped a diver into pieces in front of his friend, reminding everybody of the volatile nature and ferocity of the creatures of the sea. Stories of recent shark attacks on fishermen who dared venture too far from the shore. Owen's unease grew with each story, but Pedro seemed unfazed, assuring his friend that he knew these waters well and that sharks wouldn't be a problem. Yet the tales of terror lingered in Owen's mind, and the thought of facing these predators in the deep dark waters of the Pacific Ocean filled him with dread. The following day, Pedro and Owen plunged into the vast ocean surrounding the island, their senses alive with the thrill of adventure. The vibrant underwater world was a feast for their eyes as they swam alongside colorful schools of fish and majestic sea turtles. The waters were so clear that they could see for miles, but the clarity also made it easier for Owen to spot something sinister lurking in the shadows. His heart racing, he saw two enormous great white sharks silently gliding towards them, their razor-sharp teeth glinting menacingly in the sunlight. Owen signaled Pedro frantically, pointing at the two great white sharks that glided with an ominous grace through the clear blue water. Pedro motioned for Owen to follow him, a confident smile on his face as he swam towards the creatures. Owen felt a chill run down his spine as he realized how close they were getting. Suddenly, the sharks seemed to sense their presence, and their behavior changed. They began to move in erratic patterns, as if agitated by the two divers invading their territory. With their heart racing and adrenaline pumping, Pedro and Owen tried to retreat as fast as they could from the agitated sharks. But it seemed like the predators had other plans in store. Suddenly, one of the sharks broke away from the group and charged towards Pedro like a missile, the force of the impact sending him spinning out of control. The sickening crack of bones echoed through the water as the shark slammed into Pedro's back, leaving him paralyzed and at the mercy of the ocean's currents. As the water swallowed him whole, Pedro's life hung in the balance. Pedro was helpless as the second shark made its move. Its mouth gaped wide open, and Owen could see the rows of jagged teeth as the shark charged towards Pedro. The shark lunged at Pedro with incredible speed, and Owen could hear the bone-crunching impact as it sunk its teeth deep into Pedro's shoulder. Blood gushed out from the wound as the first shark joined in, biting down on Pedro's leg with relentless force. The two beasts pulled in opposite directions, tearing through Pedro's flesh and bones like a pair of ferocious machines. The sound of snapping bones echoed through the water as the sharks ripped off Pedro's limbs, leaving behind a cloud of blood and dismembered body parts. Pedro's body convulsed in agony as the great white sharks mercilessly tore into his flesh. Piercing pain consumed him, and he realized his life was slipping away. He felt the cold embrace of the ocean as his body continued to freefall, the only sound the deafening roar of bubbles escaping his regulator. The water around him became a swirling vortex of red as the sharks ferociously ripped apart his body, leaving behind only scraps of torn flesh and blood-stained water. The scene of horror unfolded before Owen's eyes, and he was powerless to stop it. The two sharks were like monstrous predators, unrelenting and savage as they tore apart Pedro's body. Owen was rooted to the spot, frozen in terror at the sight of his friend's brutal demise. Eventually, he regained some semblance of control and began to swim away, his heart pounding at his chest. He could feel the shark's presence behind him, a dark and ominous force lurking in the depths of the ocean. Owen's jaws gaping open, ready to strike. Harvey, undeterred, jabbed at the shark repeatedly, aiming for its sensitive nose. The shark thrashed and writhed, lashing out at Harvey with its razor-sharp teeth, But Harvey was relentless, continuing to stab the shark until it finally succumbed to its injuries and went limp. The crew watched in awe as the once terrifying predator floated lifelessly in the water, defeated by their courage and skill. With the shark no longer a threat, the crew turned their attention to Tony, who was battered and bruised, but alive. They pulled him to safety, relieved and grateful that they had been able to rescue him from the jaws of death. But Harvey and his crew knew their work was not done yet. They needed to understand why this particular shark had been attacking beachgoers, and if it had done so before. With determination in their eyes, the crew hauled the lifeless shark onto the beach, its massive body leaving a trail in the sand. They began to examine the shark, carefully slicing it open to reveal its insides. As they made their way through the layers of skin and muscle, a putrid smell emanated from the belly of the beast. Without warning, a concoction of viscous fluid spilled forth from the shark's stomach, causing the crew to recoil in shock and disgust as the decapitated head of the missing person rolled out into the sand. The realization that the man's body had been consumed by the enormous predator left the crew stunned and appalled. Recognizing the significance of this discovery, the team knew they had to press on with their examination, aware that there could be further clues lurking within the shark's belly. With steady hands and a sense of grim determination, Harvey and his crew continued the examination. They retrieved other body parts of humans from the shark's stomach, confirming their worst fears that this particular shark had been responsible for the recent life in the world. From the smallest critters that can kill you with a single touch, to massive beasts that dominate the ocean. Sharks are commonplace in Australia, and notorious for being extremely aggressive when provoked, something that Felix Marsh would come to find out during a scuba dive west of Perth in 2010. Faulty instruction and poor judgment would change Felix's life forever as he came face to face with the power of a massive great white shark. Felix was a Perth resident and spent a great deal of his life in the water, surfing in his free time when not at his job as a construction worker. However, one day, one of his friends came to him with the proposition of taking a scuba diving class, where an instructor would show them the ropes, and they would be able to check out some of the coral life near the shoreline and see what sorts of fish roam around it. Felix was quick to accept the proposition, and they set up ashore. This was a rookie dive, so the instructor only wanted to show them the basics and some of the underwater flora and fauna through a quick dive. After a rather tedious but detailed instruction on how the scuba gear is supposed to work and how they had to behave in the water, some basic communication signals, and more. Before long, the 6 of them took their positions on each side of the boat and flung themselves back into the water. Felix remembered that the initial shock of the cold water was disorienting at the start, but he was quick to get acclimated and was gliding through the water in no time. He was struck by the immediate beauty of the corals below them and the, at a glance, millions of fish swimming around them. At the instructor's command, they commenced the descent lower, so they could see the reef more clearly. Felix and Jan were entranced by the fish and the vivid beauty of the reef, but they couldn't. The sun shone down on the pristine waters of Monterey Bay, casting a warm glow on the tranquil scene below. The gentle waves lapped against the shore, creating a soothing soundtrack to the picturesque landscape. The clear blue sky stretched out above, inviting anyone to venture out into the endless expanse of the ocean. It was a day that begged to be enjoyed, a day that whispered promises of adventure and relaxation. For Andrew, this is a perfect day to go for a swim. Andrew was a skilled swimmer and diver whose love for the ocean was insatiable. He could spend hours floating in the salty waters, basking in the warmth of the sun and reveling in the coolness of the ocean's embrace. His movements in the water were effortless as he glided through the calm and clear waters of Monterey Bay, feeling the weightlessness of his body and the freedom of his spirit. Today was no different as he set out for a leisurely swim, taking in the beauty and serenity of the world beneath the waves. Andrew was entranced by the serene beauty of the ocean as he swam further out, lulled by the gentle rhythm of the waves. The shimmering blue water enveloped him, creating a sense of tranquility and calm. The deeper he ventured, the more of the world above the surface receded into a distant memory. But just as quickly as he had been entranced, Andrew was snapped out of his reverie by a sharp, piercing pain that coursed through his body. It felt like a red-hot poker had been thrust through his thighs and was now making its way up towards his abdomen. His breaths became ragged gasps as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Andrew's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation he was in. He had heard stories about sharks attacking swimmers, but he never thought he would be the one to experience it. The pain was excruciating, and he knew he was in serious trouble. Looking down, he saw the unmistakable silhouette of a great white shark. Its jaws clamped tightly on his body, and he felt its teeth sinking deeper into his flesh. The shark's strength was immense, and it was trying to drag him down into the murky depths of the ocean. Andrew's survival instincts kicked in as he began to thrash and fight against the shark's grip. His muscles burned with exertion as he struggled to free himself from the predator's grasp. But the shark was relentless, determined to drag him to the bottom of the sea. Andrew's body went into shock as he felt the immense pain of the predator's bite, but his survival instincts kept him conscious. The vicious shark had mistaken him for its prey, and its razor-sharp teeth shredded through Andrew's flesh. The once calm waters were now stained with the deep red of his blood, sending a sickening feeling through his body. The massive shark refused to let go of Andrew's body, thrashing and churning through the water with a ferocity that could only be fueled by primal hunger. Andrew's screams were drowned out by the sound of the waves crashing against the shore as he fought for his life. The relentless predator's thrashing only made the wounds on Andrew's body worse. He felt as though his body was being ripped apart piece by piece. Adrenaline continued to surge through his veins, keeping him from passing out, but he knew that he couldn't hold on forever. Andrew was on the brink of losing consciousness when he felt a sudden release of pressure from his body. He gasped for air, feeling the stinging sensation of salt water seeping into his wounds. The water around him was a gruesome shade of red, a stark contrast to the serene blue it once was. The shark had released him, but Andrew knew that he was not out of danger yet. As Andrew gasped for air, trying to keep his head above water, he saw the unmistakable shape of the great white shark closing in on him once again. The predator's dorsal fin slicing through the water like a knife, creating a chilling wake behind it. Andrew's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the shark was making another attempt to attack him. Andrew's survival instincts kicked in as he lashed out at the monstrous predator with all his might. Every push and kick was fueled by his fear and determination to stay alive. The shark recoiled, surprised by the sudden attack, and retreated to the dark abyss below. Andrew's mind raced as he struggled to stay afloat, his senses on high alert for any sign of the relentless predator. Despite his fear and pain, Andrew refused to give up. He mustered all the strength he had left to try and make his way back to the shore, but his mangled thighs and abdomen screamed in agony with each movement. He knew that time was running out, and the thought of the shark lurking just below the surface sent shivers down his spine. Fortune was on Andrew's side as a band of paddleboarders caught sight of his distress and sprang to his rescue. Without hesitation, they hoisted him onto their paddleboard, determined to bring him safe fetches, and she had a deep sense of responsibility to protect and preserve these fragile ecosystems for future generations. As Mary descended further into the depths of the reef, she marveled at the sheer size of some of the coral formations. They were unlike anything she'd ever seen before, and she eagerly began documenting her findings. She swam gracefully, her movements fluid and precise, as she observed the intricate symbiotic relationships between the corals and the myriad of marine life that called this reef home. As Mary focused her gaze on the majestic coral formation, a sense of calm and wonder enveloped her. She marveled at its intricate patterns and vivid colors, feeling like she'd uncovered a hidden treasure in the depths of the sea. But then something changed. A prickling sensation crawled up her spine, making her turn around abruptly. Her eyes widened in horror as she spotted a massive, ominous figure emerging from the shadows. Its body was massive, its movements deliberate and calculated. Mary's heart raced as she realized that she was face to face with one of the ocean's greatest predators. The creature's cold, unblinking eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, Mary was frozen with fear. As Mary's eyes adjusted to the shadowy figure, a wave of fear washed over her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she recognized the unmistakable shape of a 13-foot tiger shark, a predator that could easily overpower her with its muscular body and razor-sharp teeth. The water around her seemed to grow colder as the shark circled her, its menacing gaze never leaving her vulnerable form. Mary's muscles tensed as she remembered her extensive training, knowing that every second counted in this deadly game of survival. With trembling hands, she reached for the knife strapped to her thigh, her fingers fumbling for a moment before finally closing around the hilt. She held this unlike any Brenton had ever seen. It was over 200 feet tall, with jagged rocks jutting out from the sides. The water below was deep dark blue, and Brenton knew that it was filled with all kinds of dangerous creatures, from piranhas to anacondas. Despite the danger, Brenton knew he had to dive from this cliff. He spent the next few days studying the cliff, measuring the height, the wind, and the water currents. He knew he had to time his dive perfectly if he wanted to survive. On the day of the dive, Brenton woke up before sunrise. He ate a light breakfast and spent hours warming up his body, stretching and preparing for the jump. He knew that one mistake could mean death. As the sun began to rise, Brenton climbed to the top of the cliff. He could feel his heart racing as he stood at the edge, looking down at the water below. He took a deep breath and jumped. The wind rushed past Brenton as he plummeted towards the water. He felt weightless, free, alive. He could hear the roar of the water as he neared the surface, and he knew he had to be careful not to hit any rocks. At the last second, Brenton twisted his body and entered the water at a perfect angle. He felt the shock of cold water as he plunged deep below the surface. He opened his eyes and saw the dark blue water around him, filled with all kinds of strange creatures. But Brenton wasn't afraid. He knew he was in his element. He swam to the surface and took a deep breath of air. He felt alive, more alive than he had ever felt before. He looked up at the cliff and felt a sense of pride. He had conquered the most dangerous cliff in the world. Over the next few weeks, Brenton dove from the cliff every day. He honed his skills, trying new dives and pushing himself to new limits. He even dove from the cliff at night, using only the light of the moon to guide him. But one day, something went wrong. Brenton climbed to the top of the cliff, took a deep breath, and leaped off into the air. As he soared through the sky, he felt a rush of adrenaline coursing through his veins. But as he descended towards the water, he saw something in the distance that made his heart skip a beat. A large shadow was moving in the water, and he realized with horror that it was a great white shark. Brenton tried to adjust his course and avoid the shark, but it was too late. He felt a strong grip on his shoulder and turned to see Jan with a terrified expression on his face, pointing beyond the reef. The pair went to investigate, only to find that the reef was being stalked by a massive great white shark. Jan later reported that the beast must have been around 20 feet, which is the maximum length a great white can reach. They immediately backed up and went to tell the instructor, who pointed for them to surface. After they breached the surface, a few of the divers immediately panicked and started swimming towards the boat. But the instructor stopped them and said there was nothing to worry about. As long as they didn't disturb the shark, they were fine. Felix and Jan were calmed by this information, but the rest of the group did not feel comfortable remaining in the water, much less after the guide suggested that they swim to the shark to interact with it. Felix, Jan, and the instructor went for another dive while the rest of the group went to the boat, and with each passing second, the pair became more paranoid that the shark would attack them. But they figured that the experience would be worth the risk. As they approached the shark, Felix thought about how dead its black eyes looked, but they didn't seem threatening. They got close to it at the instructor's command and touched the shark, amazed at how rough the surface of its skin felt, even through the mesh of the wetsuit. It was covered in scars, most likely from previous battles for dominance with other sharks. The shark circled them a few times, and it seemed to be minding its own business. However, things changed when they noticed that it started getting uncomfortably close to Jan, which Felix signaled to the instructor, but he didn't respond. This irritated Felix, who quickly swam up to Jan and pulled him away. This caught the shark's attention. As though a switch flipped, the shark suddenly twisted in its trajectory and made a beeline toward Felix, sinking its teeth into his arm and flailing wildly, seemingly trying to rip it off. Felix's respirator immediately fell out of his mouth as he let out a scream that was muted by the water around him. The instructor and Jan immediately swam up to attempt to free Felix, but the shark was simply too strong. Before they knew it, the water was red with Felix's blood, and they could barely see anything. Jan, who was holding on to Felix, felt his friend float into his arms as the shark shot away from them with a trophy in its mouth. Felix was unconscious by this point and losing a tremendous amount of blood, so Jan immediately started swimming up, clutching his friend by his side, with the instructor following close. When they breached the surface, the rest of the group on the boat was waiting with bated breath, as they didn't know what else to do. But two of them rushed to pull Felix out of the water. They managed to get him on the deck of the ship, and one of the divers went to get some cloth from her bag to tie off Felix's mangled arm. It was completely torn off at the elbow, with visible bone and sinew sticking out. Jan later remarked that it was no wonder that he passed out from the pain, as the injury was, and arrived in the early hours of the morning. They specifically wanted to go to the Florida Keys again, so they set up their accommodation in the same place as before, since they knew the owner. The next day, they enjoyed the time they took off work to lounge around the beach all day, stopping at the local sites and driving to Miami for some drinks. They didn't stay too long as they wanted an early start to the fishing, so they got back around 10 p.m. The following morning, the pair went out to rent a boat as well as some fishing equipment they would need for the day. Regulations were stricter at this point, so they had to have two boat instructors with them, despite their experience in both piloting a boat and fishing for Goliaths. The men that went with them were also seasoned fishermen, and despite their age, they were excellent and enjoyable company for Sam and Thomas. It took them about 30 minutes to reach the place where the groupers usually gathered, and it was a relaxing experience for the most part. Groupers are notoriously powerful fish, so fishermen need to use a 400-pound monofilament line to even attempt to pull them in. Luckily, Sam and Thomas's boat was equipped with everything they would need. The fish took a while to bite despite the fresh bait the two guys procured at the start of their journey, but one did eventually bite, and it nearly pulled Thomas into the ocean within a moment. It was a 600-pound Goliath grouper. Sam and one of the instructors rushed to help Thomas keep hold of the fish, and they just barely managed it. It took some while to tire the grouper out, but eventually floated up to the surface, and the group marveled at the sheer size and fear of the ocean, thalassophobia. He never went into the ocean again, and the only bright spot of the incident was that Felix and Jan's friendship only deepened. The reason the instructor did not hitting the restless waves as they crashed against the shore. The travelers had been warned of the bull sharks that swam in these waters, but they paid no heed to the rumors. They were fearless and driven by the promise of an adventure that would be etched in their memories forever. The thrill of the unknown was a siren's call, luring them towards the ocean's edge. Their hearts pounded excitedly, and nothing but just the adrenaline of reeling in a behemoth like that was enough for any fisherman. The day went on, and the group caught some smaller fish as well as the occasional grouper. But it started going wrong when Sam managed to hook one. His battle with the fish was cumbersome and difficult, but Sam managed to pull the fish up by himself, as it wasn't as large as the previous fish they caught. As it floated on the surface, they noticed that the fish was tangled in a mess of netting and their line inhibiting its movement. Sam reached for his cutters and went to cut the netting from the fish before removing the hook, but it was tightly wrapped around the fish's tail and back fins. He pulled at it to gain some slack, but to no avail. The fish was bleeding and clearly in pain, so Sam set to work on cutting the netting away. As he was making progress, the fish recovered from the fatigue and started thrashing in the water, getting Sam's hand caught in the netting and pulling him overboard. He fell behind the fish, and only his arm was visible across the top of it, but the group's panic subsided when they saw Sam, smiling and saying he was okay. He still had his cutters and managed to free his hand and the few remaining strands of netting before Thomas pulled the hook from its mouth, and it was on its way. Sam chucked the netting in the boat so it could be repurposed or thrown away safely, and he kept treading water as Thomas called him a crazy bastard for doing what he did. Sam waved him off and remarked how he wouldn't forget that one. He was still smiling at what had happened, but Thomas realized that something was wrong. His blood turned to ice as he saw the surface of the water distort and splash, which Sam didn't notice. A giant red maw erupted from the water and engulfed Sam's head, pulling him under the water within a second. That single second seemed to span a lifetime as Thomas saw his best friend's life end in front of him. Thomas and the instructors yelled in surprise and stared in shock as they processed what they had just seen. They ran to the railing and looked to see where Sam was, but all they saw was his body floating just below the surface. They later confirmed that a great white shark had most likely smelled the chum and bait used to lure the groupers to the boat and took its chance with Sam. Thomas immediately leaped into the water and grabbed Sam's body, helping the others haul it up into the boat. The shark was nowhere to be seen. He fell to the floor as the reality of the situation crashed down on him, and he began sobbing uncontrollably. One of the fishermen pulled Thomas to the side and shielded him from the sight of Sam's body, while the other wrapped the body in a spare tarp to preserve his dignity. The trip back to shore was silent and dreadful, with Thomas falling into fits and panic attacks over the incident. The floor and sides of the boat were covered in blood from both the fish and Sam's body. Emergency services were called, which took Sam's body to wait for his family to arrive. By that time, a curious crowd of people gathered the vast expanse of the ocean, and she felt an irresistible urge to dive in. The anticipation of the unknown filled Emily's heart as she made her way to the water's edge. The cool Caribbean breeze played with her hair, and the salty scent of the ocean filled her nostrils. The waves gently lapped at her toes, beckoning her to dive into their depths. Emily's heart raced excitedly as she took her first steps into the group of dark shadows gliding gracefully through the water. The shape of their fins and the cold dead eyes staring back at her made her heart beat. It took a moment for her to realize what they were, but as they drew closer, she knew the truth. Bull sharks. The rumors she had heard about these deadly predators came flooding back to her, but instead of fear, Emily felt a sense of fascination. She had never seen a bull shark before, and the adrenaline rush of the moment drove her closer to the pack. The glint of their razor-sharp teeth was mesmerizing, and she couldn't resist the urge to get closer. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, the desire to capture the perfect shot taking over her. With the bull shark swimming so close, it would be the perfect opportunity to impress her friends with a breathtaking picture. She tried to steady her breathing, careful not to startle the sharks, as she extended her arm to take the photo. But little did she know that she was putting herself in grave danger. Emily's body went rigid as the shark suddenly lunged towards her. She could feel the force of the water as the predator rapidly closed in, its jaws agape and revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Panic surged through Emily's veins, and she held her breath, not daring to move. Emily's fascination quickly turned to terror as the bull shark circled around her. She could see every detail of its body, the rough, gray skin, the powerful tail propelling it forward, the rows of teeth waiting to tear her apart. Despite her fear, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of wonder at the creature's beauty. But that feeling quickly dissipated as she realized the danger she was in. Emily's heart raced as the bull shark pack closed on her. She could feel their hot breath on her skin and smell the metallic scent of blood and sea salt. Their dark, unblinking eyes locked on hers, and she knew she was in trouble. She kicked her legs frantically, trying to swim away, but the sharks were too fast. They circled around her, their fins cutting through the water rapidly. Emily's mind raced as she struggled to devise a plan, but her thoughts were jumbled and panicked. She could feel the water churn around her as the sharks closed in for the kill. As Emily struggled to escape the impending attack, her screams echoed across the deserted beach. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her lungs burned as she gasped for air. The sharks had clamped onto her limbs, pulling her down with each passing moment. Emily could feel the rough texture of their skin against her skin, and the searing pain of their teeth sinking into her flesh. The salt water stung her eyes, making it difficult to see as she fought for her life. As the sharks pulled her deeper into the ocean, Emily realized the gravity of the situation. She was surrounded by these relentless predators, and no one was around to save her. Her friends on the shore heard her cries and rushed to the water's edge. They could see the sharks circling, their fins cutting through the water. They called out to Emily, but there was no response. The water turned red with blood as the sharks ripped her apart. The group was in shock. They had never seen anything. Magdalene decided to take her small boat out to sea and spend the night sleeping on the waves. It was a clear night, with a full moon casting a soft glow over the water. She lay down in the boat and listened to the sound of the waves lapping against the side. As she drifted off to sleep to the sound of the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull of the boat, Magdalene was startled awake by a sudden jolt. The boat was rocking violently, and she could hear something thrashing in the water nearby. She sat up and peered over the side of the boat, trying to make out what was happening. That's when she saw it. A massive great white shark, easily 15 feet long, was attacking her boat. It had bitten into the side of the boat and was shaking it back and forth, trying to get Magdalene inside. Magdalene tried to stay calm, but her mind was racing. She had heard stories of sharks attacking boats before, and she didn't know what to do. She grabbed a nearby oar and began hitting the shark with all her might, hoping to scare it away. But the shark seemed undeterred, continuing to bite and shake the boat. Magdalene frantically searched for something else to use as a weapon. She remembered that she had a can of bear spray on board, but she wasn't sure if it would be enough to scare off a 15-foot predator. She quickly grabbed it and aimed it at the shark's face and sprayed, hoping to repel it with a strong scent. To her relief, the spray seemed to do the trick. The shark suddenly released the boat and swam away, disappearing into the darkness. Magdalene sat there for a few minutes, catching her breath and waiting to make sure the shark wasn't coming back. Magdalene breathed a sigh of relief as the shark swam away, but her relief was short-lived. Magdalene thought she was safe, but she was wrong. The shark had disappeared into the darkness, but it had not given up. It circled the boat and came back for a second attack. The shark reappeared, its massive jaws closing in on her arm. Magdalene screamed in terror as the shark clamped down on her arm, dragging her into the water. Pain shot through her body as the shark shook her violently, trying to tear her arm off. Magdalene's mind raced with fear and panic as she desperately fought back, hitting the shark with everything she could find. But the shark was too strong, and Magdalene's efforts seemed to only anger it more. Patient, they descended into the water,